Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Geoff Schreiber, who is the Senior Manager of Product Management for Automation at Bastian Solutions, and also going to be joined by Matt Bush, who is the VP of Technology, Innovation, and Research for KPI Solutions. And both are members of MAG, or the Mobile Automation Group, which is part of MHI. And we're going to hear a little bit about what is MAG, what is it all about. And we're also going to dive into the conversation around mobile automation integration as it pertains to AMRs and AGVs, and dive a little bit into what are they seeing, what are some challenges there, what should people know, all about that. So, Matt and Geoff, welcome to the show. How are you both?
Doing well.
Doing well. Thanks, Kevin.
Good to get you both on here. Both excited, both jumped in there at the same time. I really appreciate that. So it's great to get you on the show here, and definitely excited to talk about this because I think this is a very important thing, and a lot of people are probably going through this or will be going through this sometime soon, some type of integration in some way. So before we kind of dive into the integration discussion overall, Matt, why don't you start us off here by telling us a little bit about the Mobile Automation Group and what it's all about?
Okay. MAG is an industry group within MHI that consists of 48 members
Mm,
of industry-leading companies. These companies include OEMs, component manufacturers, and suppliers, along with system integrators. The mission of MAG is to promote the market awareness, growth, and effective use of mobile automation across our industry. We provide market intelligence, market leadership, and safety advocacy as well.
good. And Jeff, anything you wanted to add in there?
Yeah, just the other part of that is that we're focused on education. So customers that are looking at mobile automation, take a look at what we can offer and we'll help educate you on the varieties of mobile automation as well.
Mm, that's good. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the key points there too, right? Is education and just general awareness of what's happening in the industry, and especially as we see a lot of operations and warehouses that are just now starting to look at some of these technologies around mobile automation, and whether it's AMRs or AGVs, and starting to think about that education and awareness is certainly a very important part of that, and then making sure that as an industry group, you guys are enforcing or supporting those standards as well, to be able to follow along in a collaborative nature as well. As you mentioned, 48 different member companies in there. I think that's really great that you guys can all come together and be collaborative in that way. So we want to talk a little bit on the mobile automation front about integration today, right? So maybe Jeff, you want to kick us off here and tell us a little bit about, what exactly does integration mean when we start to talk about AMRs and AGVs?
Sure. So it changes based on if you're talking about an AMR or an AGV.
Mm,
But there's levels of integration as well. So it comes down to how the vehicles are going to operate in a facility, how they're going to communicate, how routing is going to be determined. If there's anything that has to be modified within a facility for the navigation features and functionality to perform the way they're supposed to.
mm,
We have to talk about how you're going to integrate with IT infrastructure potentially. If there's an interface requirement for the automated vehicles, and if the WMS, WCS, or WES is going to control that, or if it's going to be standalone. Do you have multiple types of vehicles? Do you have a variety of suppliers in the facility? How dynamic's the layout going to be? Is it something where the routes that the vehicles may take is dynamic, or is it a pretty static route? It's a manufacturing facility, or is it a warehouse?
mm.
What's the criticality of timing? So uh, integration is going to be very in depth because we want to make sure that whatever solution is put in is going to meet the needs of the end customer and solve their ultimate problem.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? Is the solution there, and being able to solve that problem or challenge that they're facing. Matt, is there anything that you would want to add in there?
No, I think when you look at mobile automation, there's 2 prevailing categories. There's material transport, which is more point-to-point movement,
Mm,
and then there's order fulfillment, which that gets a little more complicated. You get algorithms working in the background. And when you're in a warehouse, and in the manufacturing sector as well, density is a very big thing.
Mm,
Floor space is always very, very important to maximize the benefit of that floor space. So for mobile automation, sometimes you get things so close together, it's required to be behind a safety fence. And I think a lot of the industry gets hung up on, hey, everything has to be collaborative. You've really got to look at the use case and understand the throughput requirements. And does that really dictate you to be behind a fence?
mm.
And like I said, that's not exactly a bad thing to be.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's a key point there, and I guess too maybe let's clarify for people that maybe are not familiar because this is a question I think I see often and some maybe debate or misunderstanding because you mentioned in there, Jeff, that the integration could look differently whether it's an AMR versus an AGV, right? So I mean, what is the difference? I guess I'm curious. I know what I think the difference is between an AMR and AGV, but I'm curious what you guys think the difference is there as well.
Yeah.
Maybe Matt,
So I
Matt, you
think
want or Jeff? Yeah.
an AMR, it's an autonomous mobile robot. So just
Mhm.
breaking it down versus an AGV as an automated guided vehicle. It really comes down to path planning and decision making. If it's an autonomous vehicle, we're looking for the vehicle or the fleet manager to potentially help them route around obstacles, make some decisions on their own.
Mm,
Whereas if it's a guided vehicle, it's going to generally follow a fixed route. There may be some obstacle avoidance functionality in there, but it's generally returning to a planned route. And so you'll see manufacturing facilities a lot of times will use guided vehicles. Warehousing applications will start to see a little bit of both, probably
mm.
leaning a little bit more towards the autonomous side. So, Matt, anything you want to throw in?
I try to keep it simple. Does it follow a fixed path or not? I think there's a lot of time wasted debating,
Mm.
um, which is which. So that's why I really prefer the mobile automation term,
Yeah.
uh, and really focus on the use case. What are the problems that we're trying to solve throughout the industry with the technology?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, good point there, right? And I think it comes down to like Jeff said earlier, just can we solve this problem, right? In a sense, and I was just curious there because I had this conversation with somebody recently, like well, we're focused on the AGV market, supplying something to the AGV market. And I'm like, well, just AGV or AMR too? And they're like, well, what's the difference, right? So
If we have a list of frequently asked
yeah.
questions, that would be number 1 on the list.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. So thanks for that clarification there for the audience. And as we look at some of these mobile automation solutions, there's certainly been an increase in the number of solutions that are out there and offerings, right? Not only from form factor, but also from different suppliers as well. So as we've seen, whether it's a different form factor or higher payloads or different suppliers bringing these to the market, how has kind of the integration aspect around that? I mean, how has that evolved with the evolution of the offerings as well?
So I think the big thing from an integration standpoint, it gives us more tools in our tool belt to
Mm,
solve customer problems. So really on that side, it really enables creativity and the ability to tailor custom bespoke solutions
mm,
to solve problems because the problems out there are so vast. There's many different industries out there, and as you go industry vertical to industry vertical, the solution radically shifts and changes. So the increased form factors give you the ability to flex to those different business needs.
mm. Yeah, what do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, we're also seeing the ability to integrate faster kind of
Mm,
evolve. So, whereas previously with an AGV, you may have to embed a guide wire in the floor, we've come a
mm,
long ways and you can add magnetic tape on top of a floor. But now we're at feature based navigation. So the ability to take a facility map and work it into a simulation or an emulation environment and create a digital twin, bring that into your AGV navigation platform. It's just the speed at which we can bring a solution to an end customer and make an impact is really coming up. And then along with that, we're seeing the ability for fleet management to work across brands and technologies at times. We're seeing that the WMS and WCS interfaces are being shared throughout a little bit more. So there's some standardization happening that's allowing for these platforms to really just be deployed at a much quicker level. And as Matt said, really take that custom application and find the best fit solution for the end customer.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's such a great thing too for the end customers. Like the faster, right, to get integrated and implemented and deployed is, always a win in a sense, right? Because typically you look at an operation and typically it's like, well, I wish that we had this done yesterday, right? Because I need it like now, right? So, the faster we can get those things rolled out and in place and start to solve a lot of those challenges and problems, the better we can, see those gains and continue to evolve as a business and focus on what we need to do, which is, getting that product to our customer. So from an integration perspective, I mean, if we look at integration as a whole, I mean, are there different levels of integration, and what do those look like, if so? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. It's,
Mhm.
we can bring a system in that can almost be virtually standalone. You might have a discrete call that
Yeah.
interfaces with the PLC for a vehicle to show up and have materials to pick up or drop off. Um, those are going to be your most simple applications. It may be that the vehicle simply moves to that location and then there's still a human operator there that's interacting with the vehicle itself versus the vehicle doing something. They push a button and send it on its way. So that's probably your lowest end. And then
Mm.
at the same time, you can go up to a full WMS interface where inventory tracking and control is all part of those transactions with the vehicle. And you're going to integrate across platforms. So it may be that you're handing off to an AGV or an AMR from another supplier. It really just depends on what level of integrated solution is going to benefit the customer. We need to understand their bottlenecks and their problem statement and know why they're considering mobile automation, figure out what makes the most sense in their facility and what they can support from both a maintenance and a software perspective, and work from there with them.
Mm. Matt, anything you want to add?
Yeah, and really just as an example of a light
Mm.
integration, one of the holy grails within the industry is trailer load unload.
Yeah.
Those applications are a fairly light integration from a software integration standpoint. A lot of those applications aren't even integrated into the WMS layer.
Mm.
So I think as you see the technology evolve, and you see some of these discrete systems, that, are able to react to the environment around them, you're not gonna have to have that heavy integration that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a good example, Matt. I actually just interviewed Marin from Fox Robotics last week, actually on the podcast, and he was talking about that from the integration perspective. That's fairly light, and you can get up and running in like an hour or so, right, with it. So, which obviously that speed is certainly a benefit, right, to going with a lighter integration in that regard, but what would be maybe, going with a lighter integration versus like a fully integration, like you said, Jeff, with a full on WMS interface and everything like that. I mean, what are some of the pros and cons to looking at those different levels? Like, why might it be, even though I can maybe get going faster with a lighter integration, what might be like a negative there for me?
Yeah, I'd say it comes down to what your problem statement is. Are you
Mm.
trying to shore up a labor challenge that you have? Or is it that your materials are not being delivered or taken away from the line side production when they need to be? You're missing ship dates on a trailer. Matt talked about unloading trailers. Maybe you're not turning your trailers around in 30 to 60 minutes like you should. So
Mm.
it's really understanding that core problem. And then once you know that, we can figure out what level of integration makes sense. if it's a labor challenge and delivering resources to the right place at the right time, maybe full integration makes sense, and we can handle all the transactions through to the WMS completely, and you're not relying on a person to scan a ticket and put a load in the right spot for an automated vehicle to come engage with it and take it away. That's all called for automatically behind the scenes. And as we see AI kind of come into this space even more, planning for how those orders and deliveries are going to happen is something that can take another step beyond. So it's really just understanding that full scale, and at the same time understand the ability for the customer to be able to support that. Once you've put in that full scale automation, you've still got to have mechanical, technical, and software resources on site that can troubleshoot when there's a problem, or you have to be able to get a hold of your integrator 24/7. So we
Yeah.
want both to be true, but the primary point is that your operations have to stay flowing, and for that to happen, you have to be able to support the technology you put in as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I learned that lesson in my career actually. We put in this like fully automated system with everything, and we certainly did not have like the staff internally to support that as we went live and everything like that. And that was something we quickly learned we needed to invest in and, and figure out. So Matt, what about from your perspective? Kind of maybe some pros and cons. Yeah.
You look at one of the key pain points in our industry, it's inventory control, right? So sometimes at a WMS level, that can be somewhat rigid to manage, but when you add another layer, the warehouse execution system, which most integrators offer as a service as well, that helps with those managing those transactions. And when you're talking about mobile automation, you look at the case to person technology, the shelf to person technology. Those are fairly complicated algorithms. You've got a lot of transactions that are occurring. So just being able to track that and manage that inventory accurately is a very big deal, and that really calls for a deeper integration.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I come from a inventory control background, so you're speaking my language there, definitely. And yeah, I mean, I think that is such an important thing of how, because you bring in this automation, right? You bring in these different technology solutions with the hopes of making you better, right? At the end of the day, right? To have better inventory accuracy, to be more efficient, be more productive, and you want to make sure that you're able to keep a hold on that and make sure you're actually accomplishing those things. So it's a really good point there, Matt. So now I guess the mobile automation group itself, right? I mean, part of the reason for these industry groups, right, is to have some collaborative efforts within the industry, and make sure that you guys are growing, evolving, learning together, and creating these standards as well. So, there's collaboration on that side. But I'm curious, and I've certainly seen some of this going to trade shows and reading news and things like that. But do you see more collaboration happening now, I guess, between suppliers to be able to integrate better and make it easier for the customer to have multiple different automated solutions within their facilities and their operations?
As the standards evolve, and they're evolving
Mm,
now, especially around mobile automation with the emergence of the AMR. I think they're gonna become bigger and bigger to be able to understand and help drive the industry to that standardization. Jeff had mentioned, the multi-agent fleet managers.
mm,
You've got different standards emerging around that as well. So, I think the role of the industry group and MHI as a whole is to band together with these other industry standard, making organizations that we've gotta come together and align on really what's important and drive that throughout the industry.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. And Jeff, what do you think there?
Yeah, Bastian is an OEM for
Mm,
autonomous vehicles as well as an integrator. Our integration arm is really what drives what we do. But if the standards aren't there, as Matt mentioned, the other side of that is working as an integrator to make sure that you're utilizing that middleware to really come up with a path forward. So while the suppliers may not always want to work directly together, that's where working with a solid integration company is what will enable the technology to play well. And that software enablement is really what allows us to bring the right products to the right location to solve those problems.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really great point there too, because it is like, the suppliers in a sense are competitors, right? I guess in a way, right? But there has to be some realization, and the reality is that there's really no supplier out there in a sense that's like one size fits all, and is gonna automate and take care of every single workflow that we have. I mean, there may be some that are attempting to do that, right? But you kind of look at, what's the best solution for what's my problem right now and my use case right now, and you end up with multiple different suppliers potentially under the same roof, and you want them to be able to communicate and have that integration flow so that you can have that overall orchestration within the operation, and things of that nature. So as people start to look at potentially bringing in mobile automation or expanding upon mobile automation they have already, what's important for them to start to consider from an integration perspective, and what should they really kind of evaluate, and what should be top of mind as they're starting to approach something like this?
Probably several to touch on here, and we'll probably just trade off back and forth. But I would
Sure.
say the biggest one to consider starting out, in my opinion, is do you have processes in place currently and are they well defined?
Mm,
Without lack of a good process, it's going to be tough to come in and automate things. You're kind of working backwards. So, with those processes, then, as Matt mentioned earlier, do you have good data? What's the throughput that you need? And then, how do you envision those processes scaling up to accommodate business growth or changes in your business over the next 3 to 5 years to make sure that the solution that we're coming up with is really going to be dynamic to fit your needs as we carry forward?
mm. What do you think, Matt?
Process is king. So
Mm,
you got to make sure that process is good, and you don't want to automate inefficiency. So you want to try to get your process as efficient as possible before you start looking at the automation, and really understand what the problem you're trying to solve is. What's the value of solving that problem? And then what's the cost to solve the problem? So you can really calculate and have a really clear return on investment,
mm,
a picture of what you're going to be giving back to your company. There's many facility items too when you start talking about mobile automation. Floor flatness comes into play. Fire suppression with some of like I mentioned earlier, the case to person type systems.
mhm.
And Jeff mentioned it earlier, IT infrastructure. That's not really a fun topic. Not many people want to talk about
Yeah.
IT infrastructure, but it's very important
Mm.
to make sure that's right, and in place before you start.
Mm, yeah, and anything you wanna add additional, Jeff? I know you said you wanna go back and forth here, so
Yeah, the other thing I would say is how well the customer's prepared for change management. So we want
mm,
well-defined processes, as Matt said, so that we're not automating inefficiency. But there's also going to be changes that occur due to adding that automation. So how well does the go live team handle that? And their I guess adoption of the technology is critical for it to be successful moving forward. So we don't
mm,
want any surprises to the staff that are going to be working around. Matt mentioned putting things inside safety fences, which is the best case scenario. You don't have to worry about human interaction or things that are going to cause
mm,
the automation to go down. But if it is a collaborative space, what do we do to make sure that everybody working around it's comfortable? We don't want anybody to have surprises, like I said, that cause disengagement, so that post day one, you're trying to recover a system. We want everything to be effective moving out of the gate day
mm,
one and only see anything but success grow from there.
mm. Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's, it's very interesting because you look at, mobile automation, and what catches your eye initially, right, is the physical product itself, right? The hardware, the robot itself, right? But there's so many of these things that are, somewhat you could say potentially invisible in a sense, right? That matter so much leading up to getting that in place, like your process documentation, and then the change management aspect, just the just the user and the labor that's going to be around it, just the mindset, right, and psychological aspect of, what does this change look like, what does this mean for me, how do I work around this, and getting those things together to be successful in those integrations and those deployments is a huge step there, right, and something that's really important. So I mean, even though we're talking about, automation and robotics, I guess, in a sense, right, the human element is still such a critical component to this automation being successful at the end of the day. So I guess in that regard, as we look at an integration, or an implementation, and I know, Jeff, you mentioned like a go live team there. Who really, from like a end user customer perspective, I mean, who really should have a seat at the table, or at least a voice into forming what that project really looks like, and what impact it's going to have on the organization as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, from a Bastion perspective, we like to involve everybody at the table we can.
Mm,
So it's going to be end users who's going to be working around the vehicles. It's going to be the PSYOP team to understand what level of planning has to be put in place. How do they need to support it from an operations level? It's the maintenance team to understand what they're going to have to do to keep the vehicles maintained and operational throughout the facility. It's the IT team to understand what the demands on the critical infrastructure is going to be.
mm,
They're wireless vehicles, so they're communicating through usually business networks. In that case, we're not trying to come in and overlay additional wireless uh, access points or things like that. We want to try and use existing technical infrastructure. So we like to involve as many folks as we can to make sure it's a cohesive plan moving forward and that everybody's on the same page come that first go live day.
yeah, and Matt, anything you would add?
Yeah, Kevin, I'll flip my hat back to my previous experience as a customer and go back to
Sure.
our engineering days when I was organizing factory acceptance tests for
Mm,
equipment. I'd always make sure that maintenance was there.
mm,
I made sure that operations was there, the people that were gonna be working with it and maintaining the equipment long term, and on a day in, day out basis. I wanted their buy-in really early on, really far upstream. I would include them in the design approvals leading up to that factory acceptance testing. I think it's very critical to have everybody on the same page.
mm.
Communication cannot be, stated loudly enough
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I think that's such
for
a
a successful automation project.
yeah, absolutely, and I think that's such a great thing there, to try and get as many parties involved that it could have any type of impact, right, from the project or what's going to happen, and having that communication throughout. And I think that's going back to my experience too, man. I mean, I've seen projects where somebody's trying to push something along, and then it hits, and then IT's like, what's going on here? Like, what are we supposed to do? We can't do that, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, what? Like, we just hit like a wall there. So like, getting those people involved as early as possible, not only help you have that successful project, but going back to the change management aspect there too that you guys mentioned. I mean, getting those people early involved, they'll get that acceptance sooner, and be able to move through that management process, and phases, maybe a little more easily, right? And have that understanding going into it. So very interesting here to talk about integration with the both of you, and learning
Hey,
more about
Kevin,
kind of, yep, sure,
one other group that you can't forget is safety. Um, so
absolutely, yeah,
so with any automation project is especially in the mobile automation project, safety risk assessment should be at the top of your list. You should be doing that in both the digital and the physical phase. So your digital plan, can be checked and confirmed once you go live,
mm,
that all those risks are identified and they're controlled appropriately. So I think that's very important, to make sure is going on throughout the industry, and going back to the standards that are being developed that have been released, they all require that, safety risk assessment.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a very important point too there. And I'm glad you threw that in there, Matt. And I think, it's important to get those parties involved and make sure that, they understand what's going on, but then also understand how to interact and, be safe around these mobile automation solutions as well. So I'm curious, I mean, as we look to the future here a little bit, I want to hear from both of you. What do you think the future of mobile automation looks like, or what's something that's really kind of intriguing to you right now that you think is going to make a big impact in the space in the near term?
I mean, from my viewpoint, Matt touched on it briefly earlier, but I think trailer loading and unloading is probably our biggest growth space. As he mentioned, it's one of
Yeah.
the lighter integration points. There's a lot of vehicles coming to market right now. Toyota recently invested in Gideon, and we're really looking
Mm.
to see how that technology can play in that space. It You mentioned Fox, I believe earlier. It's just
Yeah.
that's an area where it's a hard job unloading trailers. We're bringing a lot of stuff in from overseas. We're moving stuff within the U.S., but it has to be done. And so, regardless of it being full pallets coming out of a trailer or bringing out individual cases that are floor loaded, that space I think is only got room to grow and hopefully make everybody's lives easier as we progress.
Yeah. And Matt, what are you looking out for?
So I think with the multi-agent fleet managers that are emerging, it's going to unlock some creativity that we haven't had the chance to have in the past. I think there's some things that we haven't even thought of yet. That's going to be really interesting as we move forward. I think as the opportunities to merge mobile automation, different form factors together, to do specific jobs. I think that's gonna be interesting. You're already seeing it today
Mm.
with case to person where you've got a large, tall robot that's moving inside of an aisle, and it's handing off to a smaller, faster robot to move it to its person station. So that's an example of something that's already happening today. But I think as we move in and those, fleet managers mature, I think we're gonna see a lot more creativity and a lot more interesting use cases and problems being solved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's still very exciting times and still very early times as well. I think too to see kind of what's coming in the future and that evolution of everything. So really, for me, really exciting space to be in the warehousing industry and get to see all these things kind of unfolding and looking forward to seeing the continue evolution in the mobile automation space and just the industry as a whole as well. So I want to thank you both for coming on the show today and talking with me. Very interesting stuff and definitely insightful conversation around integration and mobile automation in general. If people are interested in learning more about mobile automation and leveraging the mobile automation group as a resource for themselves, what's the best way to get more information or figure that out?
So to learn more, you can visit the Mobile Automation Group on at mhi.org to get more information. And be on the lookout. We have some, educational material coming out this fall, called Mag 101. So you can check that out and, learn more about mobile automation and how it can help solve your problems.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the podcast show notes here if you're listening or watching. So thank you very much, Geoff and Matt, for joining me on the show today and looking forward to the future of mobile automation as well.
My pleasure. Thanks, Kevin.
Hey, thanks, Kevin.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesAreSexy.com and get your own.